I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I want to go higher, higher than that.
Welcome back to the Business is Human podcast, where we discuss strategies to increase our VRI, value, relevance, and impact. We're here to blend meaningful work with profitable success. I'm your host, Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, here to steward what we call the age of humanity, to transform the way we work so we can transform the way that we live. As always, my friendly request, if you like what you hear, hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And then leave a review to tell the other humans that they might like it too. Always looking to help you and connect with others. Let's get into it, shall we? You know what I love about September? Other than living in the Midwest, it's literally some of the most amazing weather we have all year. Is September is that weird kind of New Year-ish vibe, right? So the kids go back to school. So that's the new school year. And in business, it's usually when conversations start happening about the new year, meaning the next calendar year. But in terms of budget planning and all the things that need to happen, in addition to having the holidays thrown in there, we got to start planning in September or January. And who doesn't love a good planning session? I actually had a couple of calls this week with clients that are having me come in and do a keynote or at least a conversation. One's virtual, one's going to be live with their leadership team and one with their whole company to talk about the Business is Human framework as a precursor to their strategic planning. And here's why. It's such a simple framework, but so powerful in giving context and clarity about the goals and the planning. So let's just review it quickly, shall we? So Business is Human is 2 columns. On the business side, we need to control, measure, and optimize. We need goals, metrics, strategies, systems, processes, all of the good business stuff that is really about facilitating growth. I like to think of it as the scaffolding that needs to go up in order for people to know how to work together to grow the business. Now, on the other column is the human needs. Humans are personal, emotional, and social. And so the needs are very different, but they're both aligned to growth. So we as humans, we're hardwired with growth and ambition. And if we can build good scaffolding for understanding the human needs, we can bring those 2 things together for great results. But unfortunately, we often double down on the business side with more programs and more goals and more systems without really understanding how our human brain works and our emotions and all the things about our nervous system and how we make decisions, which then lead to all the things that we want for our business. So if we can double down on understanding the human needs and then combine those with the business needs, everybody wins, literally and figuratively. And so I am available, virtual, live. Let me come in and have this conversation with you and your team to set you up to win for next year. Sound like a plan? Well, this is a first. Today on the show, we have an Emmy Award winner. Yeah, how cool is that? So Lauren Sisler is an Emmy Award-winning sports broadcaster for ESPN. She's also an author and a keynote speaker. And I asked her to come on the show because, you know, around here we talk about the humanity of business. And in a role like being a broadcaster on ESPN, where she's on the field, she's interviewing famous players and coaches and just has this dynamic way about her, this personality. She has the sideline shimmy that she does to get pumped up for games. she's also got a story. And she's got a story that is sad, tragic, and like many that you've heard on this show, has taken that story and created an amazing life, and has also been inspired to share that story in a way that will help others. And you know what? That's what humanity is all about. And when we can use our stories to help others, that's what makes our businesses better. That's what makes life and work worth it. And so, because work is work and work is email and work is tasks, and, you know, even when you're an ESPN broadcaster. So what happened was when she logged on to the call, that was the first time we had met other than exchanging emails. And as soon as I hit record, she asked me the question about my out of office email response, which is that I only check email on Mondays and Fridays. And it's probably the thing that I get asked about the most for people that have emailed with me. And so I just went ahead and kept this part of the conversation, which was just her and I getting to know each other. I kept it in there. So you'll hear us talk about why I only check email on Monday and Friday as the opening to this show. And then, of course, we launch into all the greatness that is Lauren's story. And she is a dynamic personality. I can't wait for you to get to know her. All right, here we go. I was in corporate sales for so long and a prisoner to email. And I just decided if I'm going to run this business, I'm going to build a business that I want to live in and to work in. And so one of the key things that I coach about is the definition of burnout is to prove yourself and always be working harder. And I thought being on for email is the definition of proving yourself, like to do it 24/7. And so I thought, I'm just not going to do that. And I'm a big faith prayer person. I was like, look, if the Lord wants to bless this business, it's going to happen whether I'm on email 24/7 or not. And it is probably the thing I get the most comments on.
I mean, literally, I'm like, this woman is a incredible leader, just amazing in the business space. And yet she's able to puzzle piece this thing together to where you have this opportunity to lean in, but also take that time midweek. And I feel like just with my schedule as a ESPN sports reporter, you know, I'm obviously on the road a lot. Emails are coming in at all times. And especially during football season, it's a little bit harder. But it's one conversation my husband and I talk about, like, how do you turn off? And
nobody's going to give you permission. You just have to decide.
Yes, I know. And it's like, if I know that email's sitting in an inbox, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, like they're waiting for my response. And I'm like, stop. Like, no.
I had to unwind it. There were a few times in the beginning where I would literally have cold sweats about it. I'd be like, what kind of message is that sending? People are going to think you're not serious about your business and they're not going to take you seriously. And I was like, how can you teach people to unwind it if you're not willing to unwind it?
Right. Yeah.
And so I just said, I'm sticking it out. Now, of course, it says in my out of office, like my clients can always use Voxer. Like they can get a hold of me all the time. And then if you have an urgent request, but keynotes typically aren't urgent. I mean, let's be real, right?
Right.
Then I have a on-demand EA that they can go to if I'm gone. So it's not like you're just like, can't reach me.
Yes.
But it has changed my life. Just not to feel like I'm a prisoner to it.
Yes, I know. I literally have 1,000 emails sitting in my inbox right now that I'm just like, when I get off this podcast recording, back to work, got to figure it all out, you know? And then you just wake up to so many and you're like,
you'll be back.
And you think like, oh, it should only take 2 minutes to answer an email, but some require a lot more attention. And then it's just your boom, boom, boom. So yes, I am going to take some words of encouragement and wisdom from you, my friend.
Yay!
Okay. We can just turn this into a coaching session podcast.
Let's do it.
All to hear and see. I mean,
let's do it. Let's do it. And you know what? We have so much in common. It's freaky. So one of your, like a podcast PR person, like reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to interview Lauren? And I looked at, yes. But then I started digging in
well, number one, we kind of look like already kind of creepy, right? Your tagline is to fall in love with your story.
Mm-hmm.
My book is called Write Your Own Story.
Yes.
And one of the key exercises I do with clients, I did it yesterday with a team, is to fall in love with your story. And I take them through this reflective exercise to unpack all the stuff, the good, the bad, all of the things. And there were just, the more I dug into your stuff, I was like, I think you're somehow connected to Impact 11, which I just joined last year.
Wow.
The same web designer, Go Live, did both of our website.
Oh my gosh. It's funny because when I saw your website, I was like, did you do like a template?
I had them do it, but
okay.
Yes.
But it was like under a template. It was kind of already built, but they just went in and like, yes. Okay. That's so funny you say that because when I looked at your website, I was like, ooh, that looks like it might be Go Live. Girl. Well, I probably need to get some 411 from you. I might need to get in on some of your coaching because
seriously, let's do it. I would,
because I do say when I sit down, especially with my therapist, that's the one thing we talk about is how do I not burn out? How do I be more intentional with what I'm doing? And especially with the book coming out in football season and having a 13-month-old at home and all the things it's like, and a husband, that is basically being stay-at-home dad when I'm on the road 4 days out of the week, how to be intentional, be grounded. And so I think it's so important. So I love, love, love what you're doing and helping people, executives, business leaders, just to explore that before the burnout actually gets real. I think for me, one of the things I really lean into is overcoming shame and leaning into that. When adversity comes your way, attack it, don't run from it. I think those are kind of the things. And obviously with my book coming out, the Shatterproof Mindset. So I'm really trying to make that shift into like the corporate world with the Shatterproof Mindset, whether it's athletes, coaches, whatever. And that's just kind of looking at adversity, staring it in the face and taking it head on and not running from it, right? But shame is like a big underlying piece of that. And I think owning our stories right and dealing with that shame is such a big part of it.
Well, one of the things I wanted to set up as a part of this conversation is something that we talk about a lot on this show, which is our uniqueness is really our superpower. And that's what you talk about with Fall in Love with Your Story. Mine is Write Your Own Story. And I love to use the metaphor of the differences between marbles and puzzles. So if you take a handful of marbles and you picture them in your hand and they're all perfect, round, shiny, they're beautiful. But if you take that handful of marbles and you lay it on the table in front of you, they all roll away. Like perfection doesn't stick together very well versus a puzzle piece with its jaggedy ass edges and the dust from the bottom of the box and all of its imperfections. If you take a handful of puzzle pieces and you put it on the table in front of you and you look for the beautiful side, and then you figure out how those pieces fit together, you get something that's stronger, more beautiful, and every piece matters. And when I think about your story and the jaggedy ass edges and the highs and the lows of our lives and the pain that comes from your story and how you're teaching people to use that pain and not let it define you, but really work through it, I think is a message that is a humanity message, because so many people in business today, especially, are trying to round out their edges. They're trying to be perfect. They're trying to make sure that they've got it all right. And that's impossible. The more you do that, the more that you pull away from the connections that you really need. So I would love for you to share your story about how you're taking that, not only imperfections, but the tragedy and pain and using it for good.
Gosh, I love, love, love just that illustration, because you're right. I think that we are in this world where we're always trying to seek perfection. I'm a perfectionist, right? Like, so Rebecca, I grew up a gymnast, and in the world of gymnastics, it's no longer like that at the elite level. If you just watch the Olympics, there is no such thing as a perfect 10 anymore. But at the collegiate level, there's still a perfect 10. So you're always striving for that perfect score, right? Because in gymnastics, there is a level of perfection. You can be perfect. And it's a very individual sport. And as I'm digging into this, I'm about to be 40 years old, y'all. Welcome to the fourth floor, about to roll up the elevator to the fourth
girl,
floor.
I've been there, done that. You're going to be fine.
Well, I mean, let me tell you, I'm embracing for it, y'all. But, through these experiences and just kind of unpacking, right, what has shaped us into who we are, right? And almost in your illustration there of like the marbles, like shape that roundness, right? And you're just striving for that perfection. And then you realize, like, wait a sec, like that doesn't even exist in this world. And so
Amen.
for me, it has been taking a step back and owning the bits and pieces of my life, the good with the bad, to better understand why I am the way I am, who I am, and to dig a little deeper. And not to say that just because I do something a certain way that might be different than, say, my husband, and that's where we like butt heads on something, it's recognizing, okay, we don't have to work separately. We have to work in tandem, but it doesn't mean I have to completely mold myself to him and him to me. Same thing in the workplace, right? Like that's what makes us unique and different. And you learn to work together. You learn to work through things, but it's your experiences that shape you. And I think a lot of times we lean out from those experiences. We lean away from them because we're fearful. We're afraid of fear and judgment. And oh my gosh, if these people know this about my personal life and know that I'm going through this, then they might take me less seriously, or I might not be as credible. And then ultimately we lean away from that circumstance and try to put it on a shelf versus using it as ammunition, using it as something positive to charge forward. And what you'll find is when you use that, there's so many people out there that are going through something similar, have experienced something similar. And ultimately you find that connector, right? Because connection is so key. And I have found in my line of work as an ESPN sports reporter, connection, relationships is key. And people always ask me, well, like you go talk to these coaches all the time. Who's your favorite coach and this and that? And then what's some of the best conversations you had? And where the best conversations come is when you've built that trust. You've built that trust in that person. And how do you build trust? It is operating, yes, with integrity, but it's also like breaking the walls down. Because a lot of times these coaches, we're talking about coaches, executives in the executive world, they build up these walls. They got to be strong and mighty, and they can't show people the real person that is flawed and that is imperfect in every way. So you got to break those walls down, right? Break those walls down. And remember, when you're sitting across the desks from somebody, or you're sitting in the room with somebody that is some radiant figure that is one of the most prolific athletes to ever
Love that radiant figure.
You just say, hey, you know what? They wake up the same as I do every morning. They have anxieties just like I do. They have fears like I do. They have pressures like I do. And they go home and sit down, hopefully, to a meal at nighttime. Sometimes it's different for everybody. Maybe that's a grab and go. I was eating a frozen pizza in the car just the other day, going to pick up my son from school. It all looks different. But at the end of the day, we're all the same. And it's leaning into that and breaking down those walls and saying, look, this is me. This is all of me. Let's talk about it, right? And I think that's where you find, like you said, the jagged edges of that puzzle aren't necessarily a bad thing. They can be a beautiful thing, but it's how do you work that jagged edge into that other jagged edge to start creating this beautiful masterpiece.
You can kind of feel when somebody's trying to round out their edges. They're trying to be more perfect. They're trying to be someone they're actually not because they think that's what people need. That I get that spidey sense from those people. And those are the ones that I just want to be like, you don't need to do that. That's not helpful. That doesn't make me drawn to you. Just tell me your real story and let's have a real conversation. I don't want you to ever be around me thinking you got to round out your edges and be somebody that you're not.
I love that. That's so good. What a great way to start our conversation. I feel like, whoo, and it really is such a good visualization as I'm looking at my desk here. It's like, okay, you can either reach for the marbles or you can reach for the puzzle pieces, right? And the marbles might just sit in a bucket looking all pretty, like you said. The minute you dump them out, they go scattered everywhere. But you can't piece marbles together. They don't form together, right?
Yeah.
And so,
in fact, the game of marbles is about bigger ones knocking out the smaller ones. That's
exactly.
literally what marbles,
yes.
the game is about.
Yes, which of course we might have to teach the younger generation what marbles exactly are, because I actually saw marbles. I was in Lake Tahoe and I was in like a little gift shop and I was like, I have not seen marbles like this in forever.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of cool. I was like, wow. I said, that's a game that, I haven't even introduced to my 13-month-old, Of course, marbles are not really safe for kids that age because he would just stick them in his mouth. But nevertheless.
But it is funny that connection to fear, right? So I just saw a TikTok the other day where everybody gets all of their news, right? TikTok.
Of course.
And it
Yes.
said that in like a 3 to 4 year period in the 80s is when so much more fear was brought into our parenting. And therefore, if you bring it into your parenting, you're basically going to bring it into your life. And it was through like a documentary about a child that was abducted. Now all of a sudden everybody was afraid to let their kids like not be supervised. And like there were 2 or 3 different things that happened that completely changed us as a society about fear. And just as you said that about marbles, I thought there are so many parents right now that are thinking, I could never give my child marbles because that would be dangerous, right? We have this, we walk around the world sometimes like afraid of things. And I think that also contributes to our inability or our apprehension about sharing who we really are, because there's so much fear of being embarrassed or being judged. And I know that was something that kind of kept you down for a while from living this great life that you're living today. Was that like, what if people find out that my story's kind of sad or bad or tragic? Fear held you back. Is that a fair assumption? Knowing since we've known each other for like 7.5 minutes, I'm going to make that assumption about your story.
But it honestly feels like we're going to be taking this conversation, y'all, offline at some point, because let me tell you, we got a lot to talk about. It is crazy because navigating life, right? Because like, here's this girl, she's a gymnast, she goes to Rutgers on scholarship. And like, I outwardly, right, I'm a public presence. I'm on TV, I do the thing, I dance on the sidelines, I have a good time. I scream joy and excitement and laughter and, goofy. I'm very goofy. Okay, y'all. But then underneath it all, like I've got stuff too. We've all got stuff. And, for me, that stuff really has shaped who I am. And shame was such a big part of that for so many years. And so I'm going to share with you the footnotes version of my story. But I just want all you guys to recognize as you're listening to this, that this has been a long journey of grieving, healing, acceptance, overcoming shame, and getting to this point where I have the courage to sit here on this podcast with you, Rebecca, and share this story. So collegiate gymnast, go to Rutgers on scholarship, living out my dream. Life is good. I grew up in a family of 4. It was me, my brother, Alan, and my mom and dad. And, very active family, love sports. We're around sports, volunteer coach. Mom always took us to practice. We were always on the go. Boom, 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 boom. And very involved in our sports. So when I earned that college scholarship, like that was a celebration, not just for me, but for my family. The investment that they put into my gymnastics career for years and years and years and years and years. And so I'm off to college. Life seems grand. I'm going to study pre-med. I'm going to be a sports doctor. I'm going to be like, I'm going to do all the things. And I get to my second semester. And I picked up the phone, called my parents like I always did. We talked on the phone. I went to Rutgers, 8 hours away from where I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, and picked up the phone, had a conversation with them like I always did. Life seemed fine. Things seemed normal, and hung up the phone, set my alarm clock, went to bed. And I wake up to a phone call in the middle of the night from my father, who informed me that my mom had died. And it was just like, what? Like we just talked on the phone a few hours ago. Everything seemed normal. It's the middle of the night. She's 45 years old. What's wrong? And so, of course, I'm starting to race with all these thoughts, like what's going on? And then at that point, my dad said, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. So then I didn't even have time to think about like the tragedy itself. It was like, just get home. I get home and expecting my dad to be at the airport to pick me up. And unfortunately, he never showed up that day, and he too passed away within 5 hours of my mom. And, of course, as an 18-year-old, I'm trying to comprehend like the fact that my 2 best friends, the 2 people I love more than anything, are now gone. Trying to comprehend how an 18-year-old is going to survive this, because yes, I'm technically on my own in college, but still very much a child. Didn't know how to write a check. I didn't know how to survive on my own. And then on top of that, it's figuring out like the why and the how. And I think for so many years, I stuffed the why and the how down because I was so afraid to acknowledge the truth of what happened to my parents. And so for years and years and years, I ran from the truth, and it just got exhausting. And it got to the point where I would just do everything I could to manipulate the situation, sugarcoat the situation, not acknowledge what happened to them. And finally, my Auntie Linda, my mom's sister, who really took me under her wing when my parents passed away, she got through to me over time, chiseling away. We talk about that brick wall. Look, I put up that brick wall, man, and it was like a brick wall with a freaking steel plate around it. And I wasn't letting anybody in. And a lot of that was because on the outside, again, I'm the bubbly dancing personality. I used to DJ like Lauren Sisler, DJ Sizzler, what's up? Like I was that person. I was the survivor. I was the overcomer. I was the girl that literally went through this tragedy, went back to Rutgers, grinded it out, found my way back into the lineup, was, team captain my senior year, like just doing all the things. Obviously, not an easy journey. Ended up almost flunking out of school because I couldn't keep up with all the academic piece of it.
Well, that's real, Lauren, because even your desire to do that wouldn't allow your brain to learn because it was in shock. So even though you were trying to tough it out, I just wanted to insert that really quickly because
good.
it's science. It's so no matter how much you were like, I'm just going to like ignore it, I'm not going to do it. Your nervous system was like, nope. We are not in a state of learning now. Sorry. You can pretend like this is okay, but it's not okay. So no wonder you burnt out.
That is so good. Yeah. Because honestly, like I go back to school, I'm trying to stay above water, trying to keep up the grades, right? And on scholarship, you got to keep up a certain grades or you're getting kicked. You're losing your scholarship, get kicked out of school. So I'm like just trying to figure out, not to mention like I chose pre-med, like of all majors, I chose pre-med. And now I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? Right. And so I'm pretty much flunking out of school, trying to stay above water, knowing that this is my life, like that's just unraveling in front of me. And I love what you said, Rebecca, because I do think it is like almost that defense mechanism, right? It's like, how much more can I soak in? How much more can I take in when my body is in a state of shock? Like I cannot absorb anything because everything is just like,
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's what I want to bring people to as well, is that I think that we oftentimes put a timeline on things, right? So like in life, this happened. And whether it's an experience that you went through before, maybe you lost somebody in your life, and then you start putting this comparison game, or you look at someone else. Well, this is how they dealt with it. I should be over this by now. Like it's been X amount of years. I should be over it, right? And so we start to do this comparison game and make ourselves think that we have to be on this certain timeline of healing and overcoming and all the things, and we should be back on our feet and we have no excuses anymore, right? But at the end of the day, number one, like we're on our own journey and our own path, and our experiences are, again, what shape us. And I think that's what I started to realize in this journey. Like, there is no blueprint or manual for, all right, this is today, you're going to wake up and this is how you're going to feel. Tomorrow, this is how you're going to feel. The next day, this is how you're going to feel. And so for me, it was really, like you said, in shock, going through the motions and not really acknowledging the internal battle that I was experiencing, which ultimately was shame. And that shame came from how my parents died on March 24th of 2003. Because a lot of people would ask, what happened, right? Your mom died and then your dad died within 5 hours. Like, what happened, right? And it wasn't just this easy explanation. So I just did this whole sugar-coated thing. Oh, well, my mom died of respiratory failure. Because guess what? Respiratory failure sounds so much better than drug overdose. So then you ask, well, what about your dad? Well, he died of a heart attack. Well, his heart stopped because he too went into respiratory failure. But that again sounded so much better than drug overdose.
So you weren't lying, but you weren't
lying.
Telling the real story.
Wasn't telling the real story. And so I had somewhere latched on to that word respiratory failure. And I was like, that just sounds so much better. And my dad was an alcoholic growing up, but I did so good at compartmentalizing that piece, right? Like he would relapse, go on a bender for a weekend, and then he'd go back to work and life would be fine for 6 months. And then he'd do it again. And it was just almost like, all right, dad's not quite himself. I'm going to kind of compartmentalize this, put it on a shelf, forget about it. Oh, life is great. Life is good. Right. And so I was aware, but I didn't know what alcoholism was. I didn't know what addiction was. I had no idea that I could not comprehend the scope of it, and that this was going to be a lifelong battle for my father, and that he was having to manage this thing. And ultimately the impact that it had not only on him, but also my mom and us as children, and the finances, and just everything was in complete array. And so what it ultimately ended up happening is my mom and dad my dad was dealing with chronic pain. also dealt with some PTSD from his service in the military. So there was some depression and things like that. So drinking was like his outlet. Well, he had back surgery. He was dealing with the pain of that. That wasn't really working. My mom started experiencing chronic pain. Okay. And so she goes in for surgery, has a neck fusion, has another neck fusion, and then basically learns that there's this thing called pain management. And pain management is a new thing. We're going to go to this pain management doctor. And she goes to this pain management doctor and starts getting prescriptions. And the prescriptions start out on this level. And then all of a sudden it's Oxycontin. And then all of a sudden it's a 90-day mail-in supply. And then Oxycontin's not working anymore. Now let's look at fentanyl. We're going to wear a fentanyl patch. We're going to use that to manage the pain. I mean, it was this whole process in this 3 to 4 year period where my mom starts going to this doctor. When my dad's in pain, he's going to start going to this doctor. They're getting prescription drugs, and it is just snowball effect, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But on the outside, Rebecca, like everything seemed normal. Like they're taking their prescription drugs as prescribed. They're functioning. Mom had to go on disability because of her pain, but she was still working part-time. And they were taking care of life, right? We had a roof over our head. We had food on the table. We're still doing our athletics. Mom's cooking nice dinners at home. We're going on, trips when we can. I knew there was a little bit of a budget, but for the most part, like life seemed normal.
Normal. Yeah.
And then the walls come crashing down. And I think the hardest part of all that, Rebecca, is just like when you walk through life, you have this picture of like how it's supposed to go, right? This next chapter is supposed to look like this, right? You have this vision for it. Never in a million years did I think that I would lose my parents to addiction. And then ultimately having to stand up and say that in front of people was so hard because, I think about my parents and the fact that they never told anybody that was close to them that they were experiencing addiction the way that they were. They were living in shame. And ultimately, when they died, I inherited that same shame. And I just kept it bottled up for so many years because people couldn't possibly look at me the same if they knew my parents died of prescription drug overdoses.
That's the story that you told yourself. That's what you believed.
Yep.
How long did you live like that, do you think?
I kind of mapped it out. And a lot of this, I have to say, has come through working through my book, right? The Labor of Love. You've got a book. I know that you know.
Oh, girl, I'm on writing my second one right now. And sometimes I think I'm crazy for doing it again, but here we are. Yeah,
I know. It's a process, but I will say it has been a journey of healing. And I will say that even 21 years after my parents passed away, suddenly, I'm still learning a lot, still growing. But like the amount of healing that I have experienced in this process has been amazing. But when I've tried to go back and map out the timeline, because we remember things in segments, right? So there's like a lot of black holes in there and you're like, wait a sec, how did this work? But really it took about 7 years to get to the place where I wasn't literally ready to knock out my aunt for speaking up and sharing the truth. She was all trying to share the truth. And I would literally want to just like fisticuffs with her because she would try to lovingly tell me that, mom and dad, how they died. And this is the sort of pathway they took. And I just like, no, like you're telling lies, right?
What's interesting about it being 7 years?
What's that?
I have chills. 7 is actually the number of perfection in the Bible, but our body's nervous system, cellular structure regenerates every 7 years. And so you're literally a different person every 7 years. And so the fact that it was 7 years is really interesting. So all of that regeneration was happening behind the scenes, whether you were willing in your prefrontal cortex to actually name it and own it, your subconscious and everything that runs the rest of your body was still regenerating and doing its own healing behind the scenes.
That is so interesting you say that because I literally just had a therapy session talking to my therapist about the number 7, the biblical piece of it. And it was actually just talking about like, even in marriage, how like we're different people. Like my husband and I have been together 7 years. We got married in 2020, but ultimately we've been together 7 years, and just the growth and the changeover and the things that used to work don't work now. And the things that didn't used to work are working, like, all the things. That's amazing. Wow.
Wild.
And it makes sense, right? because it's almost like it's the 7-year mark is when I finally just said, okay, like lay your arms down, quit trying to fight this thing. Quit trying to fight, like quit trying to fight this thing. It is what it is. And so I started to accept what had happened around the 7-year mark. And then it was really the 10-year mark when I actually opened up the toxicology reports and on paper acknowledged what happened to my parents. Had that final opening, like that just clarity of like,
You had to look at it in black and
fact.
white on a
Yeah.
report to actually own
Yeah.
it and believe
Like
it.
this is fact. Like this is what it is. And so, I think that was kind of the journey and really, and I share this a lot, especially like in my keynotes and whatnot, is my auntie, amongst other people, really just kind of helped me to understand my parents are not defined by how they died. It's how they lived their lives. And when I started sharing their story with people, my biggest fear is people were going to think differently of them. I was holding on to their legacy, doing everything I could to keep their legacy bound in my hands. And when I started sharing their story openly, like people embraced us and they embraced them even more. They didn't love my parents less. They didn't love me any less. They didn't love my brother any less. And really, it gave people some peace of mind, And I think that is what I held on to this fear for so long that it was just going to be this big shock to people. I think a lot of people kind of knew. They were at least suspicious or had their inkling about it. And they're like, okay. But eventually, they move on with their lives. They're not really thinking about it. So that timeline is interesting. And like you said, how we grow and that 70, it makes sense, right? Because you sometimes like you're walking through life and then all of a sudden you blink and you're like, wait, how did I get here? Right. But you recognize like you're an entirely different person than you were 7 years ago, right? You're an entirely different person as you're growing through different things. And I just think that's really cool to kind of acknowledge that. And it's not just a coincidence, right? There's actually science behind it and how we operate as human beings.
And it's hardwired in us. God wanted us to grow. Like we can't not grow. You're growing in some way from something all the time. And back to what you said earlier is we have painted this picture of how we think things should be on our timeline. So we are constantly trying to control things and control the outcomes. And if we would take our hands off of it a little more often and let him have reign over our growth, boy, would it just release us from a lot of stress and pain and frustration.
Absolutely. And I think that's where too, bringing the faith element to it, right? Because faith is such a big part of this, right? And having faith and as a Christian woman, I lean into my faith in God and Jesus Christ, whatever it is that you're leaning into, faith is such a big part of it. And if you don't have that faith and that trust, how in the world are you ever going to move forward? How are you ever going to push forward in this life and ultimately find purpose in that? And I think that's such a big part of why we're here is finding purpose in what we do, not just going through the motions, not just putting life on cruise control. And like you said, just sitting there, la da 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 da. Like, we've got to lean in and find that purpose and figure out what ultimately drives us, right? And what drives us to the next chapter of our lives and what drives us to that fulfillment. And I think a lot of that comes with finding our purpose and using our purpose to impact the lives of others.
Yeah. Bible says he'll use it all for our good. And so it's exactly what you're doing is you're taking your story, a tragic story, a sad story, it's unthinkable, and saying, how can I write the next chapters of my story in a way that will help and serve people? And the joy that you bring, watching your video and your sideline shimmy that you do when you're out there on the field, like that's joy. I mean, when I logged on today, it's just your energy and your vibrance and your light is so bright and beautiful. And so it's that allows you to bring this story to people so that they can connect with you and probably have some part of them healed in the process as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I appreciate that.
Me too. And so you now, not only are you out on with ESPN on the field interviewing and doing great stuff there, but now you're as a keynote speaker, you've got a book coming out in October. You're taking this story out there to the world. What are some of the big takeaways that you want people to have from your book and when they hire you to keynote for them?
Yeah, I appreciate that. As we talked about before, it's been a journey of healing. But really, we talk about, right, you write your own story. My mantra of fall in love with your story, right? It's owning each and every piece of that, every chapter. It's interesting because I've had a lot of opportunities to kind of learn and grow and sort of figure out my why. And a friend of mine, Giselle, she's actually with Impact 11. I know we talked about that.
Yeah.
Giselle. I love Giselle.
I need to get her on the show. She's amazing.
She actually asked me, we were doing a retreat with a dear friend of mine, Kelly and Brittany Turner, Kelly Strachan and Brittany Turner. And it's interesting. We were all kind of coming together, just kind of as like in little different industries, but learning from one another. And Giselle had asked me a question and it's funny because I literally had never thought of it this way. But like, when you're in business, right? One big question you get is like, who is your target audience? And it's something I've never really answered because I think we get in this mindset of like, oh, let's just help everybody. Let's just cast that net really wide and figure it out. And I think there is space for that. But like she said, close your eyes and envision like who you see out there when you speak to people. And I think what's interesting is I just had this like moment and this realization, right? That, I'm speaking to that man and I envision my father, like standing out in the audience, sitting in the audience. And it's that man that is trying to provide for his family, trying to provide, whether that's at the corporate level, executive level, wherever it's at, trying to provide for his family, trying to prove to everybody that he's worth it, that he's a man, that he is here to serve and do his due diligence to live life and to support his ecosystem, the people that are around him, right? And then I envision the mom, my mom, she in life just did everything for my brother and I. And, these are the hardworking moms that are out there trying to also prove themselves that, hey, as a woman, I can work in corporate America, or I can also be an amazing domestic engineer sitting at home, not sitting, by the way, running around, chasing children, doing all the things. Because let me tell you, being a stay-at-home mom, i.e. domestic engineer, something I heard from another dear friend of mine, is a full-time, like a quadruple full-time job. And just envisioning that. And then that person that's out there that's lost, right? Just trying to find their way, trying to figure out who they are, what they want to do to help serve others, to find purpose. And I think that's the one thing that I just hope that people will learn. And, if they get to the opportunity to pick up my book, Shatterproof, right? It's like building that shatterproof mindset. And we talk about adversity, leaning into it, not leaning away from it, jump scared, right? And I think that is what I hope that people will find. And as a woman of faith, I pray that people will pick up that book and I can meet them where they're at, because maybe they haven't experienced addiction in their family, but they've experienced something that has created shame, because everybody has experienced shame in their lifetime, whether it's a divorce, it's an infidelity, they've got an addiction to gambling, it's pornography, it's whatever it is that you're going through. I meet them where they're at and help them to realize that, look, this is a piece of you. And this isn't all bad. Let's shape this and use this as something positive, to use this to help push you forward and ultimately lean into others, create authentic connections, and fall in love with your story. Because I think that is how we become the best versions of ourselves and ultimately can serve others and ultimately serve the man above. And I think God, puts us on this earth and puts us exactly where we're meant to be. I think a lot of times I ask myself, why did it take me 21 years to publish a book, right? Like, why didn't I do this sooner? Maybe I could have impacted more lives. I wasn't ready. As I told you in that process, I was not ready.
Right.
And I'm ready. I'm ready to get it out there. I'm ready for people to hear the truth. And some of the truth is hard. Like, it's not an easy book. It's an easy read, but there's pieces of it that are gut wrenching. And it's just like, like gut punch. And it is hard. But at the same time, that is life, right? And you have to make that choice to get up. And how are you going to map out your day? How are you going to respond to adversity, right? Are you going to lean out? You're going to lean in. And it's going to smack you in the face whether you want it to or not. So you might as well just
Might as well go in.
put on the gloves and let's just go, baby.
Go.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is my prayer for people. And then ultimately, just falling in love with your story. And one thing coaches talk to us a lot about is be where your feet are. And it's a mantra that I love, because I think a lot of times we get in this mindset of like, again, yes, we do have to focus forward and how do we continue pushing forward, but it's also being grounded where we're at, being intentional. And I think you and I talked about this previously before we jumped on the podcast, right? The idea of burnout happens, and then you get to be, I'm, like I said, hitting the elevator button to the fourth floor. You get to the fifth floor and the sixth floor, and you start to look back and think like, what have I done with my life? Like, where have I gone? Like, my child's grown up now and I haven't even been here to like spend that time. And so, I just love the idea of being more intentional, right? Being more intentional with our time and taking the opportunity to just step back sometimes and say like, I'm here, I'm getting after this. And then ultimately recognizing when to take a breath. You fight and you keep fighting and you keep fighting. And then you take a moment to breathe and recognize all the hard work that you've done.
Yes.
And to celebrate those victories, right? It's definitely a lot to unpack, but ultimately my goal is just to help people learn that it is possible to fall in love with your story every single chapter.
I love that who you saw when Giselle asked you about who you serve was your dad and then your mom, because if you're giving a keynote speech and let's say 50-some-year-old, 40-some-year-old man is in the audience and he's struggling. And the industrial age model of work is what told us we have to control everything and make sure everything's okay and always make sure that we're providing. And it didn't leave much room at all for the vulnerability and the empathy and the connection. And for him to hear your story and have that moment of, oh my gosh, where I'm at right now isn't going to take me ultimately to the life that I really want. For him to see that as the flash of what he doesn't want to happen is the path that your dad was on, and didn't have anybody that was able at that time in our history of society that he could reach out to say, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, this isn't going well. And to give that gentleman in that audience, or that woman in that audience, hope that there are people that will understand what they're going through and help them reshape and rewrite the rest of their story in a way that they can really use it for their good, I think is a beautiful representation of your story.
Oh, now you're making me cry.
Yeah, because that's what it's all about, babe. If we don't want to connect in some way that helps change and nurture people, what the hell are we doing? I mean,
I know.
seriously. I stumbled on, I didn't stumble. God threw it right in my face 3 different times. Who am I kidding? This part of the Bible that talks about that basically our self-ambition that we were told was the right answer. I mean, the literal definition of burnout, the root cause from 1974, first study ever done, is to prove yourself, work harder, and take care of the business or everything else, and more than taking care of you, right? And so that prove yourself thing is exactly the theme that you're talking about. And it is the root of all evil, that it is, we got to have self-ambition. We got to go out there and we got to figure it out and we got to be successful and we got to have the thing that shows other people we're successful. And then a lot of really successful people get to a certain point in their life. And they're like, is this it? Like, I got granite countertops, a great car, however many figures in my salary, and a pretty good title. Like, that's it? I thought it would feel better. That's what people say to me. I thought success would feel better.
Mm.
And we can still have success. My gosh, I plan on making a lot of money. The Bible says that prosperity is part of the deal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if we don't feel the connection that we have with one another in a really intentional way, like your aunt was able to pour into you and just stay connected to you. And it took 7 years for it to the message to finally come through. But if we don't have the intention in our work, in our lives, in our friendships, that we're looking for ways that we can really impact people on that soul to soul level, then I don't know. I just think it's all a waste of damn time.
Oh, so good. It is so good. And yes, I mean, everything you said, and it's just that connection piece, right? It's building that bridge from one person to another and creating that human connection, that authentic connection. And as you said, giving people hope. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I was 17 when I went off to college, turned 18. It's just crazy because I think, why didn't I see it? Like, why didn't I see the hurt and the pain that my parents were going through? And I think a lot of it, number one, is they were darn good at masking.
I was going to say they were working full time, overtime to make sure you didn't see it or feel it.
Yep, absolutely. And I just, I think to myself, like, what do I do for a living? Literally, I ask questions. Like, I am the question queen. Like, give it to me, baby. I love asking questions. That's what I do. But I think back and I'm like, why didn't I ask more questions? And, I could spend all this time like beating myself up at the end of the day. But that's what I want to encourage people. Like you said, I don't feel like I need redemption in all of this, right? My parents went down that path. It was not up to me. I can't save your life. You can't save my life. That is beyond our control. But I do feel I have the opportunity to provide some hope to that man, like you said, that woman. I think about my brother, people out there that need hope. And it could either be the person that is literally struggling to put food on the table, or the person that is flying around the world in a private jet, like you said, wondering, wow, this is it? Because everyone's chasing that next thing. Everyone's chasing what it's like to be on the other side where the grass is greener. But that's not where fulfillment comes from. And it's, where do you find your fulfillment, right? Where do we find our fulfillment? And it's different for you than it is me.
Yeah, it's supposed to be, right?
Supposed to be. Yeah. And it's not chasing what everybody else wants and not what everybody else wants for you. It's finding that within yourself, making that list of things that you feel can fulfill you. And yes, it is okay if that is a monetary compensation in some way, shape, or form. Sure. But also, what can you do with that monetary compensation that fulfills you? Not just go out and buy pretty handbags.
Buy more stuff. Yeah.
For me, like sneakers, that's my thing, right? But like, what's going to fulfill you in all that? And so that's what I just challenge people as they head into the day, head into the work week, head into the next phase of their lives, is just figure out what it is that fulfills you, what fills up your cup. Write those things down and start chasing after those and lean into those things and say, okay, what's it going to take to get there? And it's okay. It's okay to put it out, speak it into the universe. Yeah. Let people hear it. Let God hear it. He hears you, but hey, it's okay. It's okay to speak it out time and time and time again.
Even if it's things that you want that everybody else wasn't a fan of. I come across that a lot in my coaching business, that my parents or my coach or my somebody told me I should do this thing that I'm doing now, and it's not really what I wanted to do. And I'm always saying, it's not too late. Make the shift, make the pivot, do the thing that's on your heart. That's the thing.
Never
God put there.
That's
late. The thing that God put there. And if he put it there, you can't stop it.
Hey, let me tell you, speaking on that, I told you I wanted to be a sports doctor. Okay, well, where did sports reporting come from? Well, the sports piece, right?
Yeah.
But I will tell you, when I was literally flunking out of school, I had to call my uncle. So my aunt and uncle, like I said, took me under their wing. My uncle was an ER physician for over 40 years. He just retired.
Which is probably where you got that seed of pre-med, that was a thing that you should probably do.
That was a thing,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say, I think being an athlete, having to go see the orthopedic doctor a lot, I was like, this would be a pretty cool profession. And then, of course, he's a doctor. I was terrified to tell him that I was no longer going to pursue medicine, because I was so afraid of that approval. And and the best part about it is, and he's a straight shooter. Let me tell you this, straight shooter, very realist, but also kind of said, like, it's probably a good thing that you're not going into medicine. I mean, your GPA is not real good right now. It probably would have been hard to get that GPA back up. And honestly, like, I don't know if you're going to be cut out for medicine. And it's funny because I laugh about it. I said, I don't think I'm smart enough for that stuff right now, but I have my gifts elsewhere, and that's fine.
And that's God's redirection too. Like, you flunking out is God's gift to say, oh girl, this was not the choice I had prepared for you.
No,
now you're made for what you're doing now. Like
doing it.
this,
I'm doing the dang thing, and and I'm having fun. It's stressful. It's not as glamorous as people think, right? But I'm having fun and I'm finding purpose in that. And I think that is where, as we come full circle in this conversation and put a big bow on it, right? Owning your story, writing your story, falling in love with your story all came to me because guess what? I ask questions. I'm a professional storyteller. I get out there, I tell stories. That's what I do. But when I got into this industry, it was the glamour, the lights, the cameras on. Ooh, look at me. I'm on TV. I'm interviewing this person. Confetti's falling on the field. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. But then it's realizing like, oh, wait a sec. This is impact. So when I step foot on that field, national anthem plays, hand on the heart, close my eyes. Guess who I'm talking to? The good Lord above, telling him to help me in some way, shape, or form. Give me the word, give me the opportunity to impact. Somebody's going to hear this story and they're going to say, wow, this resonates with me, gives them a hope, glimmer of hope, something, shine a light on it. And that to me is where impact comes in. So I appreciate what you do, Rebecca, just being a coach and a mentor to people that need this, right? And this is not for the faint at heart. This is not just like, oh, let's just fall in love with your story. Like it takes work.
You're
and
going
it takes
in deep with
time.
people too. Yeah.
Going in deep, right?
Yeah.
So this is no like little cakewalk, like, oh, let's just fall in love. No, dang, we're going to war. Okay.
And
We're going to war with
can-
ourselves.
Absolutely. And everybody can have that beginning of the day, hand over heart, national anthem playing moment from your home office, on your commute on the way to work. Every morning, I say to God, use me today in whatever way that makes sense for you, for your purpose. And sometimes that's a conversation with a barista at Starbucks. Sometimes it's a coaching client. Sometimes it's one of my kids. Like I never know how it's going to show up. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Like I've already surrendered it to him. And so I'd love for people to take what you said about that moment, because that's emotional. Like I felt that. Like we can all have that hand over heart start of our day, start of whatever work that we do moment to ask who we're serving today. And you never know. It's always a little bit of an adventure to see what shows up when you pray that prayer. So after the book comes out, after people are starting to experience the impact that you want, come back on the show and you can start to tell us some stories about that.
Let's do it, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So appreciative. And we got lots to talk about. So thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. And would love to connect with y'all. Ping me. My DMs are open. I say that. People are like, how do I talk to you? Just shoot me a DM.
LauraSisler.com or Laura Sisler, right? S-I-S.
Yeah, Lauren Sisler. Lauren
Sisler.
Yep. Lauren Sisler.
Instagram and on your website. Same thing. Go find you, follow you, chat with you. All the things. And buy the book. Yes. We'll make
buy the
sure
book. October 1st. It's coming at you. We'll have it on pre-sale though pretty soon. So I appreciate you guys following along on the journey. Rebecca, thank you. Keep doing great work, my friend. Write your own story. Fall in love with it. Let's do the dang thing. Woo!
I'm not coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I would love it if you would go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. And then you can go to RebeccaFleetwoodHession.com and join the Badass Women's Council. And if you really want to take a deeper dive, join the movement of 1,000 thriving women. There's amazing Thrive tools there for you today. Love you, mean it.
And I'm not coming down.
Hey y'all, fun fact. Did you like the music for the podcast? That is actually my son, Cameron Hession. And I would love it if you would go to Spotify and iTunes and follow him and download some of his other music. My personal favorite is TV Land.